The wind carried dust across the Arizona territory like a warning, whispering over dry grass and scorched earth. Eliza Harper pulled her shawl tighter as she walked, each step heavier than the last. The West had promised land and freedom when she and her husband came years earlier. Now it had taken everything and given nothing back. 3 days ago, her ranch house had burned to the ground, caught between rival cattlemen fighting over water rights. Her husband had been dead a year, claimed by a fever no doctor could stop. With no family left and no claim strong enough to defend, Eliza had been told, plainly, to move on. A lone woman on the frontier had little protection and less mercy. She followed the creek east, believing it would eventually lead her back to a trading post. Instead, it led her somewhere else entirely. By sundown, the land changed. The hills rose sharper, the air quieter. Eliza knew enough to recognize she had crossed into Apache territory. Her heart pounded not because she had seen anyone, but because of the stories she had grown up hearing. In saloons and churches, Apaches were spoken of as shadows, savages, dangers best avoided or destroyed. She had never questioned those tales. Until now, exhausted, Eliza made a small camp beneath a cottonwood tree. She dared not light a large fire. Hunger gnawed at her, but fear gnawed deeper. As the sun slipped behind the hills, the silence pressed in so thick it rang in her ears. Then she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She stood slowly, hands open, breath shallow. Shapes emerged from the twilight, men moving with the land rather than against it. Apache scouts, their presence calm, controlled. They did not rush her. They did not shout. They simply stood, observing. Eliza's knees nearly gave way. One of them stepped forward, older than the rest, his hair streaked with gray. His English was careful, accented, but clear. "You are alone, my lady." The words startled her. "My lady." Not the greeting she expected. I mean no harm," Eliza said, her voice shaking. "I'm only passing through." The men exchanged glances, quiet murmurs passing between them like wind through reeds. She understood none of it, but she sensed no cruelty, only deliberation. "You are on Apache land," the elders said. "It is not safe for a woman alone." That much Eliza knew was true. She thought of turning and running, but her legs would not carry her far. Night predators, human and otherwise, were far worse than the men standing before her now. These Apaches had not bound her, not threatened her. They had spoken as one might to a traveler lost on the road. Another man, younger and broader in the shoulders, stepped forward. His gaze was steady, not unkind. When he spoke, the others listened. "We will claim you, my lady," he said. The words struck her like thunder. Her breath caught. Every warning she had ever heard screamed in her mind. Yet something in his tone held no violence. She searched his face for cruelty and found none, only certainty, as if he were offering shelter from a coming storm. What does that mean?" she asked. The elder answered. "To be claimed is to be protected, fed, answered for. No one harms what we claim." Eliza's thoughts raced. In settler towns, to be claimed meant ownership, control, loss of self. But here, standing beneath the vast desert sky, the meaning felt different. She was already unclaimed by the world she knew, discarded, forgotten, left to perish quietly. The Apaches waited. They did not reach for her. They did not force her decision. The night deepened, cold creeping into her bones. Eliza looked down at her blistered hands, then back at the men who had every advantage and yet showed restraint. She understood then that the frontier was not divided cleanly between good and evil, civilized and savage. It was divided between those who took without care and those who lived by responsibility. She lifted her chin, fear still present but no longer ruling her. "I consent," she said softly. "I will go with you." The younger man inclined his head, respectful, solemn. The choice had been hers. As they led her away from the dying fire toward their camp, Eliza did not know what awaited her. But for the first time since the ranch burned, she was no longer walking alone into the dark. Eliza walked between them as night settled fully over the desert, the stars sharp and endless above her. No rope bound her wrists. No hand pressed against her back. The Apaches moved with quiet purpose, their steps measured, as if the land itself guided them. That, more than anything, unsettled her. If they had meant harm, she thought, they would not have bothered with such care. They reached a small camp hidden among low hills and juniper trees. A fire burned low at its center, tended by women and older children who looked up with curiosity rather than alarm. Eliza felt every eye upon her, yet none held the hunger or cruelty she had feared. Instead, she sensed assessment, who she was, whether she carried danger, whether she could be trusted. The older man spoke to the camp in Apache, his voice steady. Eliza caught nothing of the words, but the mood shifted. Someone handed her a blanket. Another offered a cup of warm broth. The simple kindness nearly undid her. She accepted both with trembling hands. The younger warrior, the one who had spoken the murmured words, remained nearby, watchful but distant. When their eyes met, he nodded once, not as a command, but as reassurance. Later, when the camp quieted, the elder returned and sat across from her near the fire. "You feared our words," he said gently. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. "Where I come from. Being claimed means losing yourself." The elder considered this, poking the fire with a stick. "Here, it means we take responsibility. If harm comes to you, it comes to us. If you hunger, we feed you. If you wish to leave, you may once you are safe." His words loosened something tight in her chest. "So I'm not owned?" A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "A person is not a horse," he replied. "You chose. That is what matters." Eliza thought of the choice she'd made hours earlier, how fear had driven it, but also reason. She had weighed death against trust, solitude against community. In that moment, she understood something settlers rarely admitted. Survival on the frontier was not about pride. It was about knowing when to accept help. The younger warrior approached then and knelt by the fire, careful to keep his distance. "My name is Taza," he said. "I speak for the band." "I'm Eliza," she replied. Saying her name aloud felt important, as if it anchored her to herself. "You are under my protection," Taza said. "No one will touch you without your permission. No one will speak for you without your voice." His words were plain, almost formal. Yet they carried weight. Eliza realized that the murmured claim had not been a threat, it had been a vow. That night, she slept near the fire, wrapped in the borrowed blanket. The sounds of the camp's soft voices, crackling wood, distant night birds lulled her into a rest deeper than any she'd known since her husband's death. She did not dream of flames or gunshots. She dreamed of walking without fear. Morning brought clarity. At first light, women showed her how to grind corn for the meal, guiding her hands patiently. No one treated her as a prisoner. She was given tasks, not orders. When she faltered, someone stepped in without judgment. As the sun rose, Eliza watched the Apache children laughing, elders instructing, hunters preparing for the day. It was not the chaos she'd been taught to expect. It was order different from hers, but no less real. Later, Taza explained more as they walked along the edge of the camp. "When we say someone is claimed, we tell the world, this person is not alone. To harm them is to answer to us." Eliza stopped walking. "And if I decide this life isn't for me?" "Then we will guide you to safety," he said without hesitation. In that answer, she found truth. By choosing to stay, Eliza had not surrendered herself. She had stepped into a different understanding of strength, one built not on fences and guns, but on obligation and honor. The murmured words that once echoed with fear now settled into meaning, for the first time since the West had taken everything from her. Eliza felt something unexpected rise within her. Not safety alone, belonging freely given, never forced. The days that followed at the Apache camp were a revelation to Eliza. She had arrived with a heart heavy from loss and a mind full of the stories she'd been told about the savage people of the desert. Every day since, she had been challenged to unlearn those fears and assumptions, and every day she found herself doing so slowly, carefully, and with wonder. The mornings began before dawn. Women moved through the camp with quiet efficiency, preparing food, tending fires, and caring for children. Eliza was given tasks, not because anyone doubted her abilities, but to teach her their ways and let her contribute. At first, she stumbled, fumbling with grinding corn or learning to weave strands of rawhide. But the women were patient. One, a kind-faced woman named Nayeli, guided her hands and showed her how to shape the corn into flatbread over hot stones. When the bread turned out uneven, Nayeli only laughed softly, a sound like wind through the juniper trees, and told her, "Even the strongest hands must learn patience." Eliza watched the men return from hunting trips. They moved like shadows across the land, silent and observant, always respecting the balance of the environment. They taught her about the plants and herbs that healed, the signs in the sky that predicted weather, and how to track animals without harming the delicate balance of the land. Each lesson was a small revelation. Survival on the frontier was not about domination, it was about observation. Respect and understanding. Taza, the younger warrior who had first spoken the murmured words, was always nearby, but he never intruded. He allowed Eliza to make mistakes, to explore the camp and its customs, and only corrected her when necessary. Sometimes they walked together along the dry creek beds or the rocky hillsides, and she began to see him not as a threatening figure but as a guide, someone whose strength was rooted in care and discipline rather than brute force. One afternoon, while learning to gather firewood with Nayeli, Eliza accidentally dropped a heavy bundle, bruising her hand. Instead of scolding, Nayeli wrapped it in cloth, murmuring instructions about herbal compresses. That simple act struck Eliza deeply. Here was a community that acted out of mutual respect, not fear. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of solitude begin to lift. The evenings were filled with stories. Elders sat around the fire, recounting history, moral lessons, and the traditions of their people. Eliza listened in rapt attention, realizing how much she had misunderstood. The Apache were not a people of chaos or savagery. They were a people of order, culture, and survival, finely tuned to the land that most settlers saw only as empty wilderness. Gradually, Eliza's fear transformed into cautious respect. The murmured words that had frightened her, "We will claim you, my lady," now carried a different resonance. She understood that the claim was not one of ownership but of protection, a bond of responsibility that ensured her safety. It was an unfamiliar concept, but one that began to feel comforting. In this place, she could be vulnerable and still be safe. Vulnerability, she realized, was not weakness. It was trust. By the end of her first week, she had learned to prepare meals, recognize medicinal plants, and understand the subtle codes of communication within the camp. She had begun to see the land not as a threat but as a teacher. And most importantly, she had begun to see herself not as a lost woman wandering the desert, but as someone capable of belonging to a community that valued her life, her choices, and her voice. Taza observed these changes quietly, noting her growing confidence and calm. He saw how her fears rooted in rumor, past loss, and the brutality of a lawless frontier were being replaced with understanding, competence, and self-respect. The bond between them grew, not through coercion or expectation, but through patience, guidance, and shared experience. Eliza began to understand that life on the frontier was rarely what the stories claimed. The truth was more complicated, more beautiful, and often far kinder than the tales told in distant towns. Fear, she learned, could be unlearned. Trust could be built. And in the wide, untamed West, survival did not mean living in isolation. It meant learning to see, to respect, and to belong. By the time the sun dipped behind the red mesas on the seventh day, Eliza Harper no longer feared the murmured words. They had transformed from a warning into a promise of safety, of community, and of the possibility of hope in a land that had once only offered loss. The peace Eliza had begun to know in the Apache camp was fragile, as the West rarely allowed safety for long. One morning, while helping Taza and others repair a section of the camp's fence, the distant sound of hooves reached her ears. She froze, recognizing the rhythm immediately. Riders. Not hunters for game, but humans, men with a purpose, and probably a violent one. Through the rising dust, a group of bounty hunters came into view. Their faces were hardened, and the glint of rifles in the sun told Eliza exactly what they were after. They had been hunting Apaches in the region for months, encouraged by government rewards for capturing or killing native warriors. To them, Eliza was likely a captive, another score to claim. Panic threatened to rise in her chest, but she caught Taza's steady gaze. He did not panic. He did not flee. Instead, he signaled for the camp to remain calm. "Eliza," he said quietly, "they are dangerous, but knowledge of the land is on our side. Stay close." Eliza followed, her mind racing. She could flee into the hills, try to escape back to the settlements, but she realized it would only lead her into more danger. The bounty hunters knew the terrain less than she did now, but they knew the ways of fear and rumor, two tools far deadlier than any rifle dot as the hunters approached. Taza and his warriors used what they had learned from the land. They moved silently, setting traps and guiding Eliza and the camp's women and children to concealed spots. Rocks, shadows, and the sound of the wind were allies. Eliza watched in awe as every movement was calculated, careful, protective. When the bounty hunters arrived at the camp, the Apache had left no trace that would reveal their numbers or their positions. The men shouted, demanded she be brought out, but found only silence. In the confusion, the hunters' frustration grew, and they began searching recklessly, exposing themselves to the terrain they did not understand. Eliza stepped forward, her voice clear but calm. "You are mistaken. I am safe here," she called, her tone cutting through the tension. The hunters froze, uncertain, as her confidence made them pause. She continued, explaining to them that she was not a captive, that she had chosen to stay with the Apache for her own safety. Her words carried authority, because she spoke the truth, and the bounty hunters, realizing they had been misled by rumors and greed, retreated. The Apache did not need to fight. Knowledge and strategy had protected them. Eliza's presence had helped too, showing that alliances were more than assumptions and fear. They were communication, honesty, and respect. After the danger passed, the camp breathed again. Eliza sat with Taza and the elders, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I could have left," she admitted, "but I didn't. I realized. I trust you." Taza smiled softly. "Trust is earned, but it is also chosen. You chose wisely, Eliza." For the first time, she felt the full weight of belonging. Not just surviving, but participating, standing as part of a community that valued her life and her voice. She had faced the threat of the outside world and realized that courage and intelligence, combined with trust in those who protect you, could overcome even fearsome odds. That night, around the campfire, She finally understood a truth deeper than survival. The world beyond these hills was often cruel and chaotic. But here, among these people who had taught her patience, respect, and skill, she had found not only safety, but purpose. Eliza Harper had entered the Apache camp as a frightened, widowed traveler. She would not leave as someone timid or alone. She had begun to see herself not as prey, but as a participant in something greater, a life rooted in trust, knowledge, and the courage to belong. And in that realization, she discovered the first stirrings of hope, the kind that could survive even the harshest desert nights. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of life in the Apache camp became familiar to Eliza. She no longer moved with hesitation or fear. Her hands were skilled at tending the fire, preparing food, and helping care for children. Every day brought lessons how to track game without harm, how to recognize the desert plants that healed, how to read the signs of weather and animal movement. And with each lesson, she felt more capable, more alive. Through it all, Taza remained close but never intrusive. He watched her with a quiet patience, allowing her to adapt at her own pace. When she stumbled, he offered guidance, never reproach. When she succeeded, he nodded with subtle pride. Slowly, a bond formed, not born of ownership, but of mutual respect. Eliza began to see Taza not just as her protector, but as a man of integrity, courage, and wisdom. In his presence, she felt safe in a way that went beyond mere physical security. She could speak her mind, make decisions, and explore her own skills without fear of judgment. And Taza, for his part, treated her not as a possession, but as a partner, learning from her observations as she learned from his experience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the red mesas, painting the sky in gold and rose, they walked together along the creek. The silence was comfortable, filled with the gentle sound of water trickling over stones and the wind through the juniper. "You have changed since you came here," Taza said softly. "I have," Eliza replied. "I've learned to see things differently, to see people differently. I never thought I could trust again, not after everything I've lost." Taza glanced at her, his expression unreadable but gentle. "Trust is not given lightly, but you chose to give it here, and that choice means more than you know." It was in moments like this that Eliza realized her feelings were shifting. She admired Taza for his strength, his calm, and his patience. She respected the way he led the band and protected the land, but she also felt a warmth in his presence that went beyond admiration. It was the beginning of love, not born from fear, obligation, or circumstance, but from respect, shared experience, and genuine care. When Taza finally spoke of wanting her to remain as his wife, it was not a demand but a question, posed with respect and patience. "If you wish to stay, to live here with me and the band, it will be your choice. Nothing is taken without your consent." Eliza looked around at the camp that had become her home, at the people who had become her family, and at Taza, whose integrity had earned her trust and admiration. She knew in her heart that she wanted to stay, not because she had been claimed, but because she had chosen to belong. "Yes," she said, softly but firmly. "I will stay." The smile that crossed Taza's face was quiet but full of warmth. In that moment, fear and uncertainty were gone. She had found a place in the world that had once seemed hostile and empty. Over the following weeks, their partnership became one of harmony and mutual support. Eliza continued to learn, teach, and grow within the band. And as the seasons changed, her love for Taza deepened, not the consuming, fearful love of stories whispered in frontier towns, but a love rooted in trust, understanding, and equality. In the vast open desert, under the endless western sky, Eliza Harper discovered what she had thought impossible, a life filled with respect, belonging, and a love that was freely given and freely chosen. The murmured words that had once frightened her, "We will claim you, my lady," now carried a different, brighter meaning, a promise kept, a life shared, and a bond forged in courage, patience, and understanding. Years passed, and the Arizona Territory changed around them, but the Apache camp remained a place of stability, learning, and community. Eliza Harper had grown into a woman of strength and wisdom, respected not only by Taza and the band, but also by travelers who occasionally passed through the region. She had become a bridge between worlds, translating, negotiating, and helping to maintain peace between settlers and the Apache people. The small cabin she once called home, now long gone, existed only in memory. Yet she had found a larger, richer home here, one built not on walls or fences, but on trust, respect, and belonging. The children laughed and played, learning skills for survival in the desert, while the elders continued to teach history, ethics, and practical knowledge. Eliza taught alongside them, passing on her own experiences, blending settler know-how with Apache traditions. Her life with Taza was built on mutual care and equality. They worked side by side, sharing responsibilities and decisions. Their love had grown naturally, like the desert wildflowers after spring rain, subtle at first, then undeniable. It was a love rooted not in fear, control, or obligation, but in respect and choice. Eliza had learned that consent was not just a word. It was the foundation of trust and partnership. One evening, after a long day of tending to the camp and helping prepare food for travelers, Eliza and Taza stood together on a ridge overlooking the red mesas, the sky painted with the colors of sunset. They held hands, silent but connected, feeling the land beneath them and the life they had built together. "I never imagined a life like this," Eliza said softly, her voice carrying over the desert wind. Taza smiled, his eyes reflecting both pride and tenderness. "You chose this life, and in choosing it, you became part of something stronger than any fear or hardship. You belong here, with us and with me." Eliza squeezed his hand, understanding fully the meaning of those words. She had once wandered alone, with nothing but fear and stories of danger to guide her. Now she had family, community, love, and purpose. The murmured words that had once filled her with apprehension, "We will claim you, my lady," had become a promise kept, a life of protection, respect, and belonging. As night fell, the stars stretched endlessly above the desert, bright and unwavering. The camp settled into quiet routines, the children asleep, the elders resting, and the fire burning low. Eliza and Taza stood together, not as captor and claimed, but as partners who had chosen each other freely, whose bond had been forged through trust, courage, and understanding. In that wide western sky, Eliza Harper finally felt at home. She had survived the hardships of the frontier, unlearned fear, and found a life richer than she had ever imagined. She was no longer a wanderer or a victim of circumstance. She was a woman who had chosen her own path, discovered love, and built a new home under a shared sky. The desert, once a place of isolation and fear, had become a landscape of hope and possibility. And Eliza knew, as she gazed at the stars beside Taza, that this life, this community, this love was exactly where she was meant to be. The story ends with a sense of fulfillment, resilience, and the enduring truth that courage, respect, and trust can transform even the harshest landscapes into places of home and heart.